If people tell me I can't do something, it infuriates me. Who are you to tell me that I can't do something? I was working at a pizza place. I was a dishwasher and a delivery driver. I was 18 years old. I wanted to make pizzas. One of the guys that worked at the place was like, "Oh, you won't be able to make pizzas. You need both hands." I was so mad, I said to the boss, either I start to make pizzas or I quit. And I was faster than the guy that said I couldn't do it because I was missing my hand.
If you're going to tell your story, you should talk about all the aspects. The tragedy is part of the story.
Do you think I'm disabled?
Disability is more than just a physical thing. Having people perceive that about you can shape your life.
I felt like the person that I portrayed myself as was not really who I was inside.
And that's why I said if you were to talk to someone that had the same problem, you would realize it's not just you feeling this way. But you would never want no part of that. You wanted no part of any kind of, like you didn't want to be an amputee.
I don't know if I really feel a bond with other amputees yet, maybe. And I think it's because I don't really have that view of myself. I never wanted to embrace being different.
If you're ashamed of it, it gives people a sense of, well, there must be something wrong with that. How are they supposed to be receptive and know that we're not limited when we hide it? Who puts that stigma on it?
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Dad Diary. I am your host, Danny Jordan. Thank you so much for joining us here live today on Facebook Live. If you are watching, please hit us with a comment. Let us know you're there. Hit us with a like, hit us with a heart, hit us with a haha if we say something funny. I'm so thrilled to be presenting another live episode for you all today. If you joined us a couple weeks ago, you saw when I went live with Cameron Britton, who was Emmy nominated for his performance on Mindhunter, and we are back today with another live episode that I'm thrilled to bring you guys today. If you're not already following the Dad Diary on social media, please make sure you do so. We are at the Dad Diary and on Instagram. You can also go follow us on Twitter, or if you're not following us here on Facebook or YouTube, make sure you do that as well. But enough about me. Let's bring in the guy that you guys are so excited to meet today. I'm so grateful that he agreed to come on the show. Without further ado, please welcome to the show my now friend, Mr. Jason Schneider.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing great, man. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Who better to have on for like a Friday live party than Mr. Jason Schneider?
Thanks.
I mean, you are Mr. Party. That's what I've heard about you.
Oh, really? Oh,
I'm just making stuff up.
Maybe.
In all honesty, you and I just got connected recently, and I've been chatting about that a bunch on the Dad Diary social channels over the last week, that you and I got connected through an awesome nonprofit organization called the Lucky Finn Project, which my wife and I found out about not long after our daughter was diagnosed with her limb difference. And I think they had shared at one point in time either your profile or a link to the trailer for your film, Despite the Loss. And I immediately started following your page, and you and I have sort of interacted over social media over the last couple months, and now here we are.
Yeah. Lucky Finn Projects is really great. I've met so many amazing people through that. They actually started before the film was even out. I had some social sites, or my personal site rather, where I was kind of posting that I was working on the film, and they started sharing stuff before I even knew who they were. And then I noticed, I think I had a video where I was playing bass, and they shared that, and I was like, oh, what is the Lucky Finn Project? And I looked them up, and I was like, oh, this is cool, and I started following them back, and then went to my first Lucky Finn weekend a couple years ago, and the rest is history. Yeah.
Lucky Finn weekend. Well, let's start there. As I chatted with you about before we jumped on here today, I like to keep the conversation as organic as possible. I've got a list of questions that we may get to, we may not get to. And speaking of questions, if you're watching You guys can post a comment here. I will see it dynamically live, and if we have a chance, we will include it in the broadcast here. But, my first question is, Lucky Finn Project and the Lucky Finn weekend that they do. My wife and I have been considering going to that. Obviously, first and foremost for our daughter Emerson to meet, other individuals with limb differences. Talk to me a little bit about what that weekend is like and what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool experience. I mean, if I'm honest, like when I went the first year, I was like terrified because, I had never interacted really. I mean, I interacted with people with limb differences, obviously, when I started making the film. And before that, I hadn't interacted with anyone that had limb differences. So, I had interacted on a small scale with these few people that I had in the film and stuff, but I never went to like a huge event like this. And it's actually, up in Michigan, and so I could drive there. And I took the drive, and it was like 9 hours in a car. And I was sitting in the parking lot of the hotel, like, I was literally freaking out. I was like, I'm about to go into this like weekend thing with all these people that are limb different. Like, and I had like a panic attack, and I was like, I should just get in my car and drive home. And then, because I didn't know what it was going to be like, it was just, it was a strange kind of feeling for me, and then I kind of calmed myself down and walked in and immediately saw a few people that I had kind of interacted with on the internet, and they came over and were really nice and said hello. And then Molly, who runs Lucky Finn Project, came over and said hello. And then it was like, a couple minutes I was at ease, and it was just a great weekend. Met so many amazing people, got to interact and share stories with different people. And it's the thing that I first found when I started making the film and meeting other limb different people, and then really kind of intensified through Lucky Finn, was like, you realize just how much you have in common with all these people because you have a shared experience. And somebody will be like, oh yeah, do you do this thing like this? And it's like, oh wow, yeah. And you realize that so many people can relate to how you do things or what you do. And that's just like a really amazing experience to feel. It makes you feel obviously that you're not alone, and there's other people that understand you and can relate to you and stuff.
Which is so interesting for you to say, because, speaking to your film, Despite the Loss, which I want to make sure everybody knows who's joining the broadcast, that was the trailer that you saw at the beginning of the video, is Jason's film. It was his first film that he directed, and he was also featured in it as well. And it's a very insightful piece. I'm sure you probably hear that word a lot. Okay. Insightful, educational. I'm sure you hear a lot of other words that we'll get into later on in the interview. But, in that piece, you talk about how for so long in your life, you sort of separated yourself from the amputee community or limb different community. And I'd love to explore that a little bit. And was it the film specifically that really sort of opened your eyes and maybe your heart and your mind to all, these people that you really did have a connection with that maybe you had shied away from for so long?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so when I was younger and I lost my hand, I still just wanted to be a regular kid. I didn't want anything to do with any kind of like disability camps, limb different. I didn't even know, we just called it amputees back then. I don't even think we used the term limb difference. So I just kind of hit the ground running and just continued to try to be a regular kid. And I, did a lot of things that I realized probably at first I was doing and then became such second nature that I didn't even realize anymore. Like I hid my arm because when I went out, I didn't want people, my big thing, and I talk about this in the film, was like first impressions. I always felt if someone saw my limb difference first, then they could find out that I was, Jay the filmmaker, Jay the race car driver, but they would always be like, oh, Jay the guy with one hand, and that really kind of bothered me because at that time, especially, I didn't want to be labeled as that. I just wanted to be like everyone else, So when I started to make the film, the original goal, I wasn't even going to be in it. The original goal was I just thought it would be interesting to find some other people with limb differences kind of, pushing the limits of their disability, so to speak. So that's how the film started. But then when I met the first person that I interviewed in the film, Jared, who is the mountain climber in the film, I just was like, I was shocked how much we had in common and how we just clicked, and it was because we had that shared experience and we understood stuff. And that really kind of blew my mind because I was like, wow, I never had really thought of the benefit of actually knowing and hanging out with other people that were limb different, that were like me. So the film then, it's 8-year journey, so it's a long story. But basically from that point on, then the film started to morph and change. And then I put myself in it, but then I was still kind of on the outskirts. And then as it progressed, it got deeper and deeper into my own kind of psyche and kind of the way I looked at the world and how I looked at my limb difference and how that affected me in the world and stuff. And it just became this kind of outpouring of my own personal stuff.
Interesting. So when you first set out to make the film, you weren't even going to be in it at all.
No, wasn't even going to be in it. We had shot some test footage just because I was still renting a camera at that point. I didn't have a camera package. And I had a friend who was my DP, good buddy of mine from college, who's an amazing cinematographer. And we were just messing around in my garage to get a feel of the camera before we went to go shoot with Jared, which was out on the mountainside. And I was like, let's just shoot some stuff in my garage with this 69 Mustang I have. I'll toss out a couple anecdotes about my life and, we'll just see how it works. We'll get a feel for how I want to shoot it, how I want it to look. And I ended up cutting that into just like a little kind of teaser to just show people like, hey, this is the style I want to shoot it in, whatever. And every time I would show it to people, they would be like, you have to be in the film. And I was like, no, I don't know. This isn't about me. I don't want to be in the film. So I still even fought it at that point, but that initial kind of scene and that scene in a, a much more polished form is actually still is in the film now, but we never shot it. It was never even going to be in the film. It's kind of crazy.
So was it talking to these other people, speaking with these other, amputees and limb different people, whether, they were born with it or it was something that, came out of some sort of, incident in life. Was it speaking with them that sort of compelled you to want to share your story as well, because you realized you were going on this journey as you were making the film?
Well, I mean, actually, to be honest, it kind of was like, it became like a form of therapy for me. And for a long time, I didn't even know if I was going to put it out there. Like, because obviously, like, there's a point in the film where there's kind of this revelation and there's an interview and it's kind of like the interesting moment of the film. So I never like to reveal it because I'd rather people just see, I like to edit stories that unfold over time. So I always paint myself into a corner because a lot of times I want to talk about the film, but if I give away certain parts, then it kills it. It mitigates the hit in the film. But anyway, there was this kind of crucial point where the camera was turned on myself and someone else interviewed me. And that interview is what basically opened the floodgates of all these feelings I had and these thoughts, because that person is like the only person I had ever confided in about these kind of feelings about myself and my limb difference and the way I looked at the world. So that interview was what kind of changed everything. But it took me a year to even decide if I was going to actually put that in the film, because I would literally watch this interview, because not only did I produce it and directed it, but I edited it. So it became this kind of meta performance where I'm like looking at myself editing, talking about these deeply personal things. And yeah, it was really crazy. And yeah, I mean, for a long time I was like, am I going to just bare my soul like this on camera? Am I going to put this in the film? It was really hard, but ultimately I decided that it was not only the best thing for the film, but kind of the best thing for myself too, because I just kind of had to put it out there and get it off my chest.
Yeah, and it's beautiful that you go there and that you are so honest. It's interesting, to watch the film. I think for anybody to go out and watch the film, whether they have a limb difference, or they're a parent of a limb different child, or they don't connect to that community at all in any way, I think there's so many takeaways, because for me, I was thinking about it earlier today, how did I watch your film? How did I process your film? And I think first and foremost, I think you process it as a human, because it's a very human story. We all have, as cliche as it is, we all have differences. We all have tragedy of some sort of sadness that we encounter in life that molds us, that shapes us, that defines us in the way that we walk through life. And then obviously I'm watching it as a parent, a parent of a limb different child, and these stories that you are sharing of your own life experience and the other limb different individuals that you interviewed in the piece. And, it really impacted me just thinking about the journey that my daughter will go on in her life, and these questions that I'm sure, much like you and the other people in your film, have asked themselves, or struggles that they have had that she'll encounter that I will never understand. And I think that speaks to, when watching your film, one of the most impactful interviews that you did for me, at least personally, was when you would talk with your mom.
Yeah.
You know, because it's one, I'm very close with my mom, and we've had a lot of, you know, very raw conversations, and I could see your dynamic being very similar to that of my mom and myself, because she's very blunt with you, just like you're sort of blunt back with her. Clearly, that runs in the family. But
Yeah.
just, you know, the way that you would dialogue with each other, I realized that I was watching this film as a parent, and I was just so intrigued by the conversation that you guys had with each other, and how you didn't want to share the backstory of your limb difference, but she felt it was so important for you to share it. Had it always been like that between you guys, like throughout your childhood, you know, up until that point?
Well, interestingly enough, just a funny aside is she actually, I had never thought that she would be in the film either. Originally,
Mm,
when I started to make the film, I wasn't even planning on interviewing her, and it was like maybe year 3 or 4, because I was working on the film kind of part time in between, you know, paid edit gigs and stuff like that. And she just, like, it was a holiday, I think, and she kind of made an off the cuff comment like, "Oh, I thought you would interview me." And I was kind of shocked because my mom doesn't really normally like to do that kind of stuff. So I was like, "Do you want me to interview you?" Because I just didn't think she would, you know. And then I went there with no expectations. I didn't really even have, I had, you know, just a rough outline of questions I wanted to ask. But we ended up just getting into this back and forth. It was almost like a 3-hour interview. And it was same
wow.
thing like when I watched that interview of myself, that was a revelation. That was also a revelation because I was like, oh my God, my mom is such a big part of this film and is going to be, you know, because obviously I'm always thinking as an editor as well when I'm shooting stuff. And just as we're having these dialogues, I'm like, oh my God, that's going to be in the film. Oh my God, that's going to be a film. Oh wow, this is it. And she said things to me that I hadn't really thought of, much like the other interview. She brought stuff out of me that I just wouldn't have even thought to include into the film. And, you know, as far as my accident goes, I mean, we don't really ever talk about how I lost my hand or anything. It's not something that probably since, you know, maybe the first year when it happened, we've ever talked about. But that was something that we, you know, started to talk about because a lot of people that in the industry that I would show kind of rough cuts of the film, they would always say, well, you don't talk about how you lost your hand. And that would get me really irritated because I would be like, well, why does that matter? Like, I do all these things. I'm a filmmaker, et cetera, et cetera. Like, why do I have to show, you know, or tell the sad story of how I lost my hand and, you know, it's inspiration porn? And I'd get really, really upset. So I had that back and forth with my mom. And then still, you know, she was like, well, do you want me to tell the story? And I was like, yeah, sure, fine, tell it. And she kind of told it. Again, never expecting it to be in the film. And it was very, very late in the editing process where I was like, I needed the film to kind of turn a corner to get, you know, past like the, you know, the second act into the third and final act. And it was just missing something, you know, and the light just went off and I was like, you know, I gotta discuss the accident. I have to talk about the accident. And it was literally like maybe 2 months before I had the cut that I started applying to festivals and stuff with that I ended up putting that in there. And then it changed everything, changed the whole third act. I mean, it changed the whole kind of scope of the film. So yeah, all by, you know, I'm sure you, as you know, because you work in this industry as well, especially in documentaries, the film is really made in the edit. You can go out and you can shoot something and you have an idea of what you think you're making a film about. But when you get in the edit suite, that's when it really you know, especially in documentaries, that's when it really becomes a film. And you know, that was no exception with my film. Like that's exactly what happened. The film changed so many times in the edit after shooting stuff.
I'm sure, and it's sort of interesting that you say that like the back part of your film changed once you sat down with your mom. It's like it almost feels like you, something inside your mind changed as well, where you realized, oh yeah, this is important to the story. This thing that I've tried to avoid for so long uh, is part of my story, you
Yeah,
know, and
absolutely.
which is so intriguing to me. And I've just, what is you mentioned inspiration porn and how you feel like talking about your story feels that way, and that's a phrase that I hadn't heard until a few months ago. I was sitting down, or I sat down with a close friend of mine who has cerebral palsy, you know, and we were talking about some projects that I was working on related to my daughter Emerson. And she, you know, and he was, you know, really encouraging me in what I was doing. But one thing he said to me was, please just make sure that it's not inspiration porn. And I had never heard of that before. So I think it's, if I haven't heard of it, my sense is that a lot of people haven't heard that term as well.
Right.
So I'd love for you to shed a little bit of light on what that term is and sort of what it means to you.
Yeah, I mean, so inspiration porn is basically, and I only really learned that term a few years ago. There's an incredible TED Talk, and her name is escaping me now, but this woman who had some disabilities, she gave this incredible TED Talk about inspiration porn, and that was the first time I had heard that term. You know, I just always knew it was something that I just really didn't like about films with disability, because truth be told, 99% of the time, films about disability or people with disabilities are made by able-bodied people. And I think from years and years of conditioning of seeing media a certain way, society is just expected to see a film about someone with a disability being like 80% of the film is about their accident, the tragic thing, all their suffering, you know, and it basically becomes this kind of vehicle to basically, in my opinion, say to able-bodied people, well, look, you may think your life stinks, but at least it's not this bad, you know? And it's like this inspiration porn where people can, able-bodied people, whoever, can just say, oh, wow, I don't have it so bad, I don't have it so tough. And that's, you know, it reduces people with disabilities down to like one-dimensional characters. And that's something that I hated. And so anytime, for the most part, I saw a film about disability or someone with a disability, it just always gave me that kind of like icky feeling inside, basically, you know? So I knew when I started to make my film, even before I knew I was going to be in it, that was something that I definitely did not want to do. I didn't want to exploit these people's stories, or I wanted to minimize, you know, how they maybe had got their limb difference, but show more about, you know, yes, address the struggles and kind of the things that they're going through in life, because that's what we all have, struggles, and we go through stuff. That's kind of like a universal thing, but make it more about getting through that stuff and the aspects of their lives that just, you know, showing them as three-dimensional people, because people with disabilities are people, you know, we're people first, you know, we're not just inspiration stories. That's not our kind of sole existence, you know, at least in media for sure. So yeah, so that's kind of what that means to me. I mean, even recently, last year, I was involved in a project, and they came to me, and I said the same thing, much like your friend. I was like, yeah, I'm interested in this, but it can't be inspiration porn. And I had to, you know, and they were very good, and they listened to me, and I was very, very happy with the way the end product came out. But like it was, you know, a back and forth, because they would be like, hey, you know, let's do this with you, or can we have you talk about this? And I'd be like, hey, no, you know, like this is getting into the area where now we're discussing this, or we're, you know, let's start playing the violins under this, you know, and it's, I think it's a natural inclination to kind of do that. I think also just because we're so conditioned as a society with media to kind of look at people with disabilities like that. And that's something that I wanted to change. And I think hopefully my film does change.
I think it does. And, you know, it brings up a question for me of, you know, you being on your side of this conversation, what are some bits of advice or direction that you can provide to people, you know, like myself, or any sort of storyteller that feels compelled to tell a story, whether it's in film or television or a book or whatever it may be, that involves somebody that's from a group that they don't necessarily identify with directly?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing I could say is to just actually, especially if you're making a film or something like that, or you know, interviewing someone, ask them, you know, because ask them how they feel about their story, ask them what they want to be conveyed, because that's actually kind of an interesting aside as well. I've also found, now that I've made the film and it's out there in the world, and I've kind of interacted with not just limb difference groups, but other disability groups and stuff, you know, there is this whole kind of, people come from a lot of different sides, like the word disability, for example. Like a lot of people in the limb difference community don't really embrace the word disability, myself included. I don't like to say, I think I'm at the point where I like to say, if somebody says I have a disability, I'm fine with that. But if somebody says I'm disabled, then I would kind of take that offensively. And that's because of, you know, this years of stigma behind the word and stuff like that. But there are other groups that embrace disabled, they embrace disability. They say, I am disabled, use the word, you know. So there's no one size fits all, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. So I think it's important, whoever, you know, the story you're trying to tell, to ask that person how they feel, and, you know, and go from there, kind of, you know. It's hard, like making a film about anything is hard, and balancing, you know, all the different elements of a story. But I can always say, like, if the story is leaning too hard on the tragedy part, then you're usually going down the road of inspiration porn, you know, and you need to, it's that difference between like a one-dimensional versus like a three-dimensional character, fully, you know, formed person. You see all the elements and aspects of their life instead of just this one thing, you know?
Right. So talk to me about like how your life has changed since you shot the film and then edited it and then released it. Because I'm sure you were going through one certain series of emotions while you were filming it. And then I'm sure once you got into the editing bay and you started hearing yourself and your thoughts, and then you released it, I'm sure that's been sort of a journey for you. And I'm curious to hear how it's impacted you specifically.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, like regardless of any kind of like, you know, financial or critical success of the film, making it completely changed my life. Like I have such a better just understanding of myself. I have so much more self-love for myself. Like I'm just much more happy as a human being, you know, because I realized as I was making the film that I had these kind of really deep kind of entrenched thoughts about myself and the world and the way the world looked at me, and I didn't really have a lot of like self-love for myself, you know, and it was bad, and it manifested in different ways in my life where I probably had, you know, self-destructive behavior in certain areas, nothing, you know, crazy, but just like it was affecting my life in a way that I didn't really realize because I was bottling up all that anxiety and all those feelings I had about my limb difference and that the world looked at me differently and that I was constantly afraid what people would think of me. And I always wanted to prove myself to people like random strangers. You know, now I think like, why did it even matter what I cared, what a random stranger thought of me on the subway or something if they saw I was missing my hand. But, you know, pre-making the film, my mind would immediately go to these places like, oh, if they see I'm missing my hand, they'll think, oh, his life must be so limited. He must have it so hard. And all that stuff would really bother me, you know, but I wouldn't tell anybody about it. So I just kind of push it down inside and lock it away. And yeah, I mean, it was terrible. And now, yeah, it's like I'm completely transformed. I walk down the street with my arm out of my pocket. I don't even realize that it's out. If somebody stares at me, I catch them staring at me and I just kind of look and I keep walking. Whereas, again, in the past, if I saw somebody noticing my limb difference, if it was out for some reason, I would immediately bury it in my pocket. I would try to hide it because I was ashamed. I had like a lot of shame and self-hatred and stuff like that. And the film completely helped me work through and let go of a lot of that. So it's incredible for me.
Have you thought about, I'm sure you have, like, do you think the reason you felt that way, at least until you shot the film, do you think part of that is connected to your limb difference being a result of something that happened after you were born, the result of an accident, rather than it being congenital? Have you thought about that at all?
I don't think so, because everyone I talked to in the film, whether they were congenital or accident acquired their limb difference, they all had those feelings. Now, granted, I can't say that the people that were born that way, they probably had less of the feelings. They were definitely more secure in themselves because like that's all they ever knew, you know, that's who they were. So I think there is a little bit probably where, but I was also very young. I was 12 when I lost my hand. So it's not like I had a fully formed kind of adult picture of myself. But actually that I can say like Jacob, who appears in the film, he lost his hand now when he was 21 in a motorcycle accident. And it didn't make it into the film, but he spoke to me when we were talking about the fact that it was harder for him. You know, they say that the older you get, it's harder to adapt to losing a limb. So I think there probably is some truth to what you're saying. Like, I think when you're used to your life being a certain way and then it's a huge change like that, it can be a lot harder and probably bring on self-hatred and doubt and all that stuff. But I think everybody, for the most part, had those feelings. But yeah, definitely more, I would say, who acquired their limb difference later in life.
How do you think this whole situation with your accident, how do you think it's impacted your mom? Because like I said, you know, I watch this as a parent, right? You know, watch as a human first, but then it filters through me as a parent. And I think about Emerson, my daughter, who you know, and who, you know, so many people who followed the Dad Diary and our journey specifically know that Emerson was diagnosed with a limb difference when when my wife was 22 weeks pregnant. And, you know, I don't think there's anything that we did or we could have done, you know, to prevent it, obviously. But, you know, I think about every day, you know, what can I do to make her life the best that it possibly can be? And beyond that, you know, what can I do? What can I put out into the world to help make this world a more accepting and exposed and understanding place. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, how this has impacted your relationship with your mom, and how she's processed all of this over the years.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. When I interviewed my mom for the film, that was kind of the first time that I ever even really kind of, because I've always kind of just felt like, well, this is my deal. Like, this is the stuff that I had to deal with. I don't know if I ever really thought that much. Once I started making film, I did. But before that, I don't think I ever really thought about how my limb difference could have necessarily affected my mom or the rest of my family and stuff. So that was a little surprising to me, that to hear about the early stuff, like some of the things that didn't make it into the film that we talked about were like, I asked, were you nervous? Were there things that you were afraid of? And, she told these stories where she was basically like, yeah, when you were younger, we were wondering, like, are girls going to date him? Is he going to find a girlfriend? Are girls going to like him? Is he going to be able to do, XYZ thing? Is his life going to be limited? And then she was basically like, but then you just started doing your thing. And we were all like, oh, okay, he's going to be fine. But, those were the concerns that she had early on. And I'd never really kind of thought about that before. But yeah, it's I think, to go back to your earlier thing as well about like parenting and parents and stuff like that, I think for me, and I've asked pretty much everyone in the film this as well, like their feelings on it. And I think the biggest thing as a parent that they can do for a child with a limb difference is just to treat them like any other kid. If you put a kid with a limb difference in a glass house because you're afraid that they can't do this, or they're fragile or whatever, then they're going to grow up feeling that way. They're going to grow up thinking they're limited. Like my parents were basically just like, go do the things you want to do, and they never specifically said that I couldn't do anything. They never tried to really stop me. I mean, actually, the only time my mom ever stopped me from trying to do something was I really wanted to have a stick shift for my first car. And she was just like, and looking back now, I think like, okay, I could totally understand how she would think I wouldn't be able to drive it. But she basically made me get an automatic car for my first car, and I was furious. So as soon as I could like get rid of that car and buy a second car that was a stick shift, I did. And my dad actually was like, yeah, I'll teach you how to drive stick. Like, never said maybe you won't be able to do this, and he taught me, and I've pretty much driven stick ever since. But yeah, they just never put limitations on me, and I think that's so important. Is just let them figure it out themselves too. Because I think a lot of times, now I'm not a parent, but you read a lot in the news and stuff. Parents today, there's a lot of the helicopter parents and the all this kind of stuff where the parents really kind of tightly control their kids. And I'm kind of from a different generation. I grew up in the 80s where we just kind of did our thing and we're kind of
right.
off leash.
Right.
You are as well, I'm sure. But like, yeah, I mean, I definitely think like it's letting the kid try, and don't be afraid to let them fail at things, because the failure is what's going to give them that out of the box thinking to figure out a different way to do this stuff. Because it's all about adapting, and if they don't have that chance to fail and learn how to adapt, then they're never going to figure out how to adapt at all.
Right. It's so interesting. I mean, that's something that, I think my wife and I, we go on that journey every single day, with our daughter. One, it's, I think, the limb difference, but I think more so than that, she's our first child, so I think inevitably with your first, you're just trying to figure it out. Every day is
Right.
There's a new batch of adventures that you deal with every single day, and then they get sick or they fall and bonk their head or whatever it might be, which are things that every kid does, right?
Yeah.
So it's that constant conflict of wanting to be there and wanting to show love, but like you said, also I don't want her to grow up in a glass house. I want her to fall down and scrape her knees and scrape her hands so she learns how she catches herself, right? Because being born with her limb difference, she never crawled in a traditional sense, because she's missing a bone in her right forearm, and as a result of that, she doesn't have a traditional, socket on the right side. So she had to learn how to army crawl, which then impacted the flexibility and the strength in her hips and her legs. So like everything that she has done, she's had to learn to do it her way. And there was something that happened very early on, when she was, I want to say, probably 3 or 4 months old. And, I was sitting here with her one time, and she was holding her bottle, and I started saying to her, I was like, oh, no, you want to like hold your bottle like this. And I was like, you know what? And I know she couldn't understand what I was saying, but I said to her, Don't listen to a word I'm saying right now. I've never lived life with an arm and a hand like yours, so I have no idea what the best way is to hold a bottle, and that was such an aha moment for me as her parent, and I think it's just a human in life, right? Is that none of us know what anybody else is going through, unless there's someone who's intimately close to you. And sometimes in those cases, you still don't know what's impacting someone. You don't know everybody's difference. You don't know everybody's tragedy. Some of them you can see, like in the case of yourself, and you can see Emerson's limb difference, but there's so many other things that people go through every day that you can't see, and I think it's being mindful of that in the way that you interact with people. And yeah,
and you have to be. Yeah, I was going to say you have to be, and you have to be supportive as well, because you have to let them fail and let them try and stuff like that. But then obviously be supportive also, because there will be challenges and there will be adversity that your daughter's going to face, and other kids with limb difference, because kids can be cruel. There are situations in life where things are going to happen. People are going to doubt her ability, and sometimes she might not get the chance to prove herself. I mean, I can think of a story when I was first started out in film, and I was an intern at a company, and I started working on set one day, and they didn't even think anything of it. They just tossed me a camera, and I was going to run the second camera. Now I knew how to do it because I had done it myself already and been practicing. But one of the other people on set, they freaked out, and they were like, he can't hold that camera. He can't shoot that camera, and I wasn't given the chance to do it, even though I would have been able to do it. Now I had to sit there and kind of like take that, and that hurt, and that was annoying, and I was bothered by it. But, that just only made me kind of want to practice even more, make sure the next time I get the opportunity, or hopefully I can get the opportunity to do that. So I'm bringing it up just to say, like, especially if something happens like that to your daughter when she's younger, it's obviously you be there as a parent to be supportive and say, well, hey, because unfortunately life can be unfair sometimes, so there'll definitely be times where you need to support her as well. But yeah. So it's kind of, like anything, it's that give and take,
Right. Yeah, I mean, that I wonder how, this was another question I was thinking about, as I was preparing for this conversation today, is, how someone like you feels, because in the film, one of the women that you interview, Abby, I believe is her name, she gets approached by a mom of a child, Patrick, who has a limb difference. And, she basically asks her if she'll sort of answer questions for her, and then they end up meeting, and you follow that in the film. Has that been a part of your life at all? And if so, what is your take on being sort of like a source of information, or like a friend, as it were, to another individual, in most cases, probably a child with a limb difference?
Right. So that was Nikki in the film,
Nikki,
because,
excuse me,
and but that was an interesting story, because when I had found Jacob and Nikki, off the cuff, she, again, something where I didn't even think about having a child in the film at first. And then when I was talking to Nikki and Jacob, Nikki said to me, hey, there's this woman that I have seen at the gym. She has a son that we live in the same town. He's limb different. She always asks me a lot of questions. Do you have any interest in having him in the film? For me, that was like then such a green light, because I was like, oh yeah, that would be cool to have a child's kind of perspective. But then also I thought it was interesting because she had never really kind of interacted with Patrick. She'd only interacted with Karen, Patrick's mom. So I was like, I want to film you going to meet Patrick and talking to him and seeing what he feels like and stuff. But anyway, to get back to your original question, like, that's kind of something that's new to me, and really more I found through going to events like the Lucky Finn weekend and stuff like that. Like, parents, it's mostly parents coming up to me rather than kids. The funny thing is, my first Lucky Finn weekend, I didn't really know what to expect, and I didn't know if kids were going to come up to me and ask me questions or ask me how I do things. And to be honest, like, the kids could care less that I was there. They were like running around with all the other kids just doing stuff, and it was more so the parents that would come up and say, like, like yourself, and would say, hey, how do you feel about this, or how do you do that, or like, we had this thing. So a lot of times, even online as well, like, I have people send me messages and stuff, and it's it's not so much like the kids and stuff. It's more the parents of limb different children that have a lot of questions. So, and look, I'm not a trained professional or anything like that, but I try to do my best to just say how I would approach a situation, or what I would think about a certain thing. And that kind of stuff has been really rewarding. I never really thought about that, the kind of like, that outreach type stuff. And I didn't want to do anything like that in the film itself, because that wasn't something that I had done pre the film. So I felt like it would be misrepresentative of my life if I tried to show in the film that I was talking to people with differences or doing stuff like that. But that's definitely become something that's happened now post film. And yeah, I get letters or emails and messages from limb different people that have watched the film, and they're like, wow, your film made me think I have these things that I need to unpack in my own life. And, they say thank you. And then we get into a dialogue. Recently, I had someone who just lost their hand kind of find the film and watch it. And they reached out to me, and, I've been answering questions for him and trying to guide him if I can. Like, it's that's cool. Like, that to me is so rewarding. I mean, it's just another kind of layer in this film where you wouldn't really get out of a traditional film. If you just made a film about somebody or whatever, you put it out, you do the press, and then it kind of does its own thing. This is kind of, it's really changed my life in so many ways, which is just incredible.
Yeah, I was going to ask, prior to the film, would a Lucky Finn weekend and talking to parents and interacting with kids with a limb difference, is that something, that's not something you would have done prior to the film, right?
No, definitely not. I mean, before I started making the film and kind of unpacking all this stuff, I would have never done that, because I would have not, I had closed that part of my life off. I felt like it didn't even exist, which is so crazy to think about now coming out the other side. But yeah, I didn't want to embrace anything about my limb difference at all. I mean, I was a regular person. I did not have a disability. I didn't have a limb difference. I didn't even want to say that I was an amputee. I mean, I literally fit, obviously I am an amputee. I fit the definition, but you could not describe me as that. Like, I say that in the film because I just completely shut that part of myself off. And yeah, now, post going through all that stuff and making the film, I'm open to all of that stuff now, and it's transformed me as a person. And obviously I get the chance now to help other people maybe go on that same journey and better themselves, which is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, as a parent of a limb different child, being able to watch that film for me is educational. It moves me as a human, but then I think about how incredible it must be for all the people around the world who are limb different, whether they be adults or kids or congenital or via amputation or whatever it may be, that they have this piece of media out there in the world that I'm sure represents them in a lot of ways, and
I get that a lot. A lot. People say, like, I feel represented, like I felt seen when I watched your film. I felt like my story, a lot of people tell me, message that they can relate to what I went through. Because I was terrified. These were all the thoughts that were in my head about limb difference, but I didn't know if other people in the limb difference community felt the way I did. I mean, obviously I knew from the people in the film that I interviewed and met that they felt similar to me, but I was actually terrified right before the film came out, because I was like, what if I put this out and other limb different people watch it and they're like, I don't agree with what this guy says at all, and they hate it. That was something that I was really terrified of. So I was relieved and so thankful and grateful that so many people did relate to the film and found it relatable, because yeah, I mean, there were many times in the edit where I was watching myself say all these things and talk about this stuff, and I was like, does this only mean something to me? Like, is this going to mean something to other people? But I tried, just as a filmmaker, I'm sure as you know, like, I wanted to make the story as universal as it could be. So even though the film is about kind of my journey and the other characters' journeys with limb difference, I didn't want it to be specifically about limb difference, because I did feel like, even though limb difference is obviously a little bit more serious than, say, somebody that doesn't like, their eyes or their nose or whatever. But like, we all have these things about ourselves that we don't like, and we hide and we bury and we don't want to deal with. So I tried really, really hard when editing the film to make sure that the story was universal enough that people who weren't limb different would still get something out of the film. Because that was really my ultimate goal too, was kind of to show people that, yeah, you don't have to watch that inspiration porn stuff. Like, you can watch these stories. You could see that we're just like you. We have hopes and dreams, and we're just living our lives and doing things. And that even in itself is a great thing that I get too. I get emails and messages from people that aren't limb different that say, I watched this film because of XYZ, didn't think I was going to relate to it at all. And then I found myself completely relating to the film because I have, XYZ about myself that I don't tell anybody, or I have this self-hatred because of this or that. And that is also kind of really nice to hear just as a filmmaker, because like, I feel like, okay, people are relating to the story, not just limb different people. It's universal. It's universal, which is important.
It really is. And before we go any further, I do want to do, a shout out. I know there's some people from the Lucky Finn Project community who have been tuning in and watching. So I want to say hi to all of you out there, whether you're watching live or you're going to watch it later. I want to give a shout out to you. If you're from the Lucky Finn Project community, drop an orange heart in the comments. I know that I see those on a lot of posts on Lucky Finn's Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
But there's also I want to shout out. We've got someone in Costa Rica who's watching us, Jason. I think it's Minor Hersala. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that right. But what's up, Minor? Welcome to the Dad Diary community, and thanks for watching. Do you know Minor, Jason?
He's been following me for a long time. Yeah, it's cool, and I've been following him as well. Yeah, that's actually really cool as well. Like just meeting so many people through, virtually meeting them around the world and stuff. Like it's really cool to connect and find all these really interesting people doing great stuff. Like if it's the person I'm thinking of, he's a photographer as well, and I was following like his photography on Instagram and stuff. And I find that limb different people in general are very, very creative. I think because we have this we have to just do out of the box thinking just to live and kind of figure out things. And I think this is just my theory, but it boils over, I think, to creativity and stuff, because so many limb different people I found online always have something going on. We've got like a million projects going on. One's a photographer, a writer, an author, this, that, the other thing. It's like everyone in the community is doing really interesting stuff, And my personal opinion, I think it probably has a lot to do with that out of the box thinking and just looking at life differently, I think it maybe opens up that creative part of your brain a little bit more.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Is I almost wonder, because there's so many creative sort of problem-solving things that individuals with limb differences have to do to figure out how to open up a jar or whatever it might be. Is that you're constantly problem-solving,
right,
all the time. As someone said that to us with our daughter very early on, was she's going to have incredible problem-solving skills because she's going to be every day of her life. She's going to be figuring out how she turns the page of a book, how she brushes her teeth, how she, ties her shoes. And it's cool because like I think about, oh my gosh, like her problem solving skills are going to be so much better than mine are, because she's just going to have been exercising that muscle in her brain and those muscles in her body her entire life.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that is like totally an asset. That is an asset that helps you in life. I mean, it's almost funny. Like before I started meeting other limb different people, I just kind of like, not to pat myself on the back, but like I just thought I was a creative person because that was just my nature or whatever. And I think probably there was a part of me that's just creative from whatever genetics, whatever you want to call it. But when I started meeting these other people that were limb different, I was like, oh my God, they are all incredibly creative. Like they have this same creative bug and gene, is out of box thinking. And I realized a lot of the way I am is because of my limb difference, So like, I don't know, maybe if I didn't lose my hand, I'd be a different person right now. Maybe I wouldn't be a filmmaker. Maybe I wouldn't build and race cars. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of interesting to even look at it that way, like the positive spin of it and just the asset. But yeah, I mean, I've been on set for things sometimes, even in projects where people are working and they say, well, we can't do it this way, because they just think, well, this is the way you light something, or this is the way you mic something, or this is the way. And I'm like, why? We can do this. I'll just come at it with like a completely different kind of way of doing it, just because my mind is always working like that. And I totally think that has to do with my limb difference, just thinking on the fly and being creative in situations. Yeah. So it's a huge asset as far as that stuff goes.
That's awesome, man. That's just so cool. I want to give a couple more shout outs while I see these comments coming in. Actually got to shout out my parents. They're both
nice.
Right now, and longtime friend Linda. How you doing, Linda? And then Christopher Spry, who's a producer that I worked with in New York. What's up, Spry? Nice to have you joining us here. If there's anyone else watching, hit us with a comment. Like I said, over in the comment section, just let us know you're there. Give us a heart, give us a thumbs up, give us, like I said, a ha-ha if you think what we're talking about is funny. If it's not funny, then give us a sad face, because we're not funny people. But anyway, I'm just so grateful that you took the time to jump on here today, Jason. The reality is, like, if Emerson didn't have a limb difference, then I would have never found out about the Lucky Finn Project. And if I'd never found out about the Lucky Finn Project, I wouldn't have been connected to people like yourself. And it's really opened up my eyes, as a human, to so many aspects of the world that you kind of see, like you said, via people sharing stuff on social media or like a news report that you see. But I think when it's your life, every single day, you have a totally different perspective on it, and it changes your perspective about that difference specifically, but then also every other difference that's out there. You start to understand people in a whole new way. Like one of my best buddies, his middle son is autistic, and I don't think I really ever, and I never will fully grasp, what their life is like every day, because I don't live in their shoes every day, but I began to understand a little bit of it. Because going through raising Emerson and noticing people noticing her, and knowing that people, like you said earlier, will question maybe her ability to do stuff, at certain points in time, you have more empathy.
Right, that's what I was just going to say. I was going to say empathy. Yeah, empathy is a big thing. I mean, in empathy, the whole world could use a little bit more empathy, especially nowadays. It seems like a lot of people are lacking empathy. But yeah, empathy and that's something, again, also that I kind of really learned from the community as well, and embracing this part of myself. I mean, I always had empathy, but to really embrace and meet these other people and kind of, they let me into their homes and their lives, and I got to experience, their secrets and their pains and their struggles, but also their triumphs, and all that stuff just gave me such a more of an appreciation for limb difference, myself, the world, other people, because like I said, we all have struggles and we're all going through stuff,
Right. Minor just posted a comment that I have to share live in the broadcast here. He said, "We are problem-solving people. Creativity is in our software."
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. That's such a great thought there, Minor. Thanks for sharing that. But I know you're a busy guy, Jason, and I try to be respectful of people's time. And I'm so grateful that you came on today. Like there's so many other questions that are running through my mind, and then the beauty of it is that you and I are connected now, and I consider you a friend now.
Yeah. Likewise. And yeah, I mean, I got nothing going on. None of us have anything going on these days.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't mind. I mean, it's up to you. If you have more questions, happy to answer. I mean, I'm just sitting in my house like everybody else in America right now. But, not to say to keep it going, but whatever.
I do have, is Abby the person, I don't want to reveal anything if you don't want to reveal it, but that's the person who knew you most intimately?
Yeah. Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we can. Sure.
Okay, so Abby is your ex, and I thought that was such an interesting device, I guess we'll call it, in your piece. And she's very thoughtful, obviously. Yeah. Like you can see, because I love the way that you shot your interview with her, because a lot of it was just you talking to her, which was sort of interesting, because I think when you're watching somebody be interviewed, you're seeing them talking about things all the time, and you're not seeing how the other person is reacting to what they're hearing. And you did this really cool thing where you were watching her sort of processing all these things that you were sharing with her that it seems like you had never shared with her up until that point in time. And then you saw this really cool scene where she interviewed you. But what was sort of intriguing to me about that is you showed all these questions that she asked you, but you didn't really share any of your answers to her questions. You just showed your reaction to her questions. Was there a reason that you left that part of it out?
Well, I think, just as a narrative device, just put my filmmaker hat on. I just like the idea that the film kind of unfolds as I'm asking all these questions, right? And, and we could just talk about this. I mean, like I said, I'm protective of certain moments in the film where I want people to experience them as they're watching. But, basically, as the film's going on, the layers are kind of peeling back. The film starts and it's like, you may think the person that's watching that I'm this super confident guy, and here I am on a racetrack and I'm, racing cars and doing whatever. And then, as the film goes on, I start to ask these more questions. I meet these more people, and my kind of psyche just unravels basically. And I edited the film like that just by design. But so that moment with Abby is kind of like the culmination of all of that. So really, to me anyway, there was no reason to kind of answer those questions, because those questions were actually what I was answering in the film, up to that point, basically, So it was kind of like that point for me anyway, as a filmmaker, should kind of read as this is the moment when you realize that this is the interview that kicked off all of this stuff, basically, that sent me down this road. Because, Abby and I were together for 3 years, and we were even engaged. She was my fiance. In a lot of ways, she was the reason I started the film because, she was just supportive of me at the time. And I kind of wanted to, I had this idea. And again, like she says in the film, I kind of had a vastly different idea at first what the film should be and how I was going to approach it. I wasn't even going to be in it. And, through her kind of like gentle poking and prodding as I was starting to do the film, that's what made me start to take a much more personal angle. And then, it's that interview where she interviews me where, she was the only person up to that point that I had confided a lot of the things that I talk about in the film to. So she knew that stuff and she brought it out of me. And that's when the film completely changed, so that moment is kind of really the culmination when I got hit with all those questions from her and realized like, wow, I've got some stuff I need to unpack and deal with. Yeah.
And I guess it is, that is very impactful when you think about the fact that she asks you these very deep, thought-provoking questions, and you can see it in your eyes and in the reaction on your face that she struck a nerve, and she's hit on something that you are feeling in that moment. It's almost like she's got this little chisel and a hammer, and she's just like chiseling away at the last little pieces of this wall, this fortress that you've built around yourself and through the journey that you went on, obviously in your life leading up to the film, but through the film specifically, like those bricks were starting to come loose, and then she just sort of broke it all down and like you saw yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if, I think eventually I probably would have gotten to that point, but her interview, and again, that was something, there were so many happy accidents in this film where like things that, interviews I didn't think were going to happen. So her interview, again, was something very off the cuff. We had started out filming something completely different that day, and it didn't go as planned. We had a terrible shoot. We didn't get the footage we wanted. I was really annoyed. And I was literally like, why don't you just come out to the garage and just interview me? Ask me whatever you want. And that was literally, that interview just completely blew open the film and changed everything. And even her interview in the film, that also, just much like my mom, didn't happen until very late in the process. We had not been together for several years at that point. We would maybe exchange a text message once a year or something like that, but we really weren't in touch. And as I was editing the film, I just knew it was missing something. I was like, I need her perspective for the film. I need somebody else besides myself talking about these, because she was there for a lot of that initial stuff where my life started unraveling in that way. So, I messaged her and she thought about it, and she agreed to be in it. And that was very late in the game. So her interview, when I sat down with her, again, going into the edit, much like I did with the interview with her watching me talk, I was like, oh, wow, this changes the whole film. And I was literally like blowing apart the entire film like 2-3 months before I had my rough cut finished, inserting her pieces and changing things around the conversations that we had. And yeah, so she, I owe so much to her for what the film is and the way it is. And yeah, because she cracked open the floodgates of all that stuff for sure.
It almost feels like that's exactly how it was meant to happen. You talk about how you wanted to shoot it this specific way and it didn't work out, and you're like, well, let's just go do it there. And it's almost like because you weren't thinking about it being exactly the way it needed to be, that you'd sort of that wall had fell down a little bit, and it opened you up to that moment when you needed to be opened up to it.
Absolutely. And I, the film took me 8 years from the start to finish to putting it out. And, normally documentaries take 4 or 5 years, especially when they're, the indie docs and, you're funding them yourselves and stuff like that. But like when it started really getting into year 6 or 7, I was kind of like, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish this film. I don't think people thought I was ever going to finish it, but now looking, but then I would finally reach a point where I was basically like, if I don't devote my life full time to this, I'm never going to finish this film. And I basically spent 2+ years only working on the film, just taking edit jobs when I literally just needed money to pay my bills and stuff, and that's when I really finished it. But I only said that just to say that, like, if I had finished the film earlier, years prior, before all these other things happened in my life, it would have been a completely different film. Honestly, it probably would have sucked. It wouldn't have been a good film, even though it took me 8 years, I had to go through all those steps to get the film that I have now. And at the time, it was incredibly hard and frustrating, but like, I'm so glad that all of that happened and played out that way, to have the film that I have now, because it's the best version of the film I would ever want and I could ask for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it really does feel like that's how it was meant to happen. Because like
Yeah.
you said, like the story that ended up being told would have never existed on film, or at least in this film, had it all gone the way that you planned it. And I think that's just sort of, that's life, right? You know, like
Yeah.
we have
Yeah.
this story that we write, and that was, you know, the biggest thing. You know, when we found out that Emerson was missing one of the bones in her forearm, in her right forearm, you know, I'll never forget, you know, because they immediately sent us to see this genetic counselor, you know, right after the doctor confirmed everything. And, you know, I think my wife and I were in a good place mentally. You know, I think we, you know, for me, I always tell people that what hit me in that moment when I saw that image of Emerson was, that's my daughter. Like, she became so real to me in that moment. But I remember sitting there with the genetic counselor, and she said to us, you know, if you're disappointed or sad right now, it's because of your own expectation. It's not because of the expectation that your child has for her own life. And that really like impacted me in a significant way, you know, as a storyteller. You know, it what I thought was, oh my gosh, I wrote a story that wasn't real.
Right.
I wrote this story of my child's life that was never her story, and in reality wasn't mine to write. And, you know, and that's why I think it's so interesting where you share like your journey with the film of like what the story would have ended up being if it went exactly the way that, you know, you thought it was supposed to go. And now look at, you know, where you're at with this incredible film. And, you know, for those of you who've tuned in that weren't here at the beginning, the film is Despite the Loss. If you've not watched it, make sure you do so. It's available for streaming on Amazon Prime Video. It's on Vimeo. Is it Vimeo
iTunes.
Plus?
They call it Vimeo on Demand, basically. Vimeo on Demand, and it's on iTunes as well. Yeah.
So if you don't have anything going on this weekend, which you shouldn't, because you all should be staying at home and keeping a safe distance from people, you can watch it on your phone. You can watch it on your tablet. You can stream it on your TV. It's an incredible film that Jason obviously committed a lot of his life and a lot of his energy and a lot of his passion to. And I think it's incredibly insightful, not just for those in the limb different community, but anyone who's, you know, navigating life, because we've all had hardship. We've all had some sort of sadness or something that didn't go the way that we wanted it to go, that we then reacted to and led us down this new road in life. And I'm so grateful for you making that piece, Jason. And I'm just, again, I want to reiterate, I'm grateful for you coming on the show today. And
yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Are there any other sort of thoughts that you want to add that we didn't touch on here, you know, as it pertains to your film, to those living with limb differences who may be tuning in, or parents who just found out, you know, their child is going to have a limb difference? I know that's sort of a cliche question to ask, but I think it's something, as I've experienced, that it is helpful to talk about it. It's been really helpful for us, I know.
Well, I think it's interesting. I'd like to just touch on what you were just saying a moment ago about how, you know, you had these expectations, right? Or you had this story that you wrote for your daughter before she was even born, and it was not her story, you know? But I wanted to say, like, you know, that's universal to everybody, just us as people. All of us in life have these things that we want our life to go a certain way, or we have these things that we think are going to happen, but then they don't. And, you know, that's how you really grow and move forward in life, because you have to roll with those punches. You have to roll with those expectations. That's why something like that is so universal, you know? So I just wanted to say, like, it's not even just about like a limb difference, you know, it's about, you could have your own expectations or my own expectations. I know there were things in my life that, you know, by age whatever, I thought I was going to hit this milestone or do this or do that, and it didn't happen. And some people I know, just from people I've met in life experiences, you know, it's the people that can not hit those marks, have that disappointment, and then figure out, okay, well, let me get up, dust myself off, and keep going, and chart this new path for myself, that really thrive in life, versus the people that think, well, that thing didn't happen and now it didn't happen, so I can't do anything else, you know? So that's just such a universal thing of like writing your own story, but also not just expecting that life is going to go the exact way you plan it, because life is never going to go the way you plan it for the most part.
That is true. And I feel like a lot of us are experiencing that at the same time right now.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people
Especially.
thought they were going on a vacation, thought they were, doing this or that. I mean, that's the reality of life, right? And it's how you react, and like you said, how you sort of move forward. Is it things are going to happen that are disappointing, that are going to break your heart, and it's how you react to it and how you allow it to help you grow, not diminish you.
Grow and change for the better. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Jason. Well, I do have to jet because I have a baby down the hall that I gotta relieve my wife, who actually may be watching this. So, sweetheart, I'm coming to take the baby here in a second. But Jason, again, I'm so glad that we connected. I'm so glad that you came on today. Like I said, if you haven't checked out his film, Despite the Loss, make sure you do so on iTunes, Vimeo, Amazon Prime Video. Just search Despite the Loss. You'll find it. Make sure you go follow Jason on social media at Despite the Loss on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm sure Twitter as well. And if you're not following The Dad Diary, make sure you do so as well. Here on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram at The Dad Diary, all the things. But anyway, Jason, I know I've said this a ton, but I'm just so grateful for you, not just giving of your time, but of your insights and for sharing your story with the world.
And me as well. Me as well. Thanks for having me on. I mean, it's, as you know, it's incredibly hard to get people to like talk about this kind of stuff, and especially independent film and stuff. And obviously we have a connection why you wanted to do this, but like, I'm just so appreciative. Anytime I get to kind of hopefully expose the film to more people and get it out there, it's just so important to me because I feel like the film can really help people and it's important,
I agree 100%. So everybody go watch it. Don't rent it, buy it. Okay, just buy it because you're going to want to watch it again and you're going to want to show it to your friends. So, Jason, I don't know if you know how we do this, but every time on The Dad Diary, we sign off in the same exact way. Do you know, or do you need me to coach you real quick?
No, you gotta coach me.
Don't worry, I've had to coach every single person. I'm looking forward to the day where enough people watch this show where people actually know what I'm talking about. But anyway, we sign off every time with peace and love. So I always say,
I can't do that though, but I can't do that.
Well, then how about we do it like, wait, hold on. I have to do it like that. So if you go to the other side, go to the other side of your frame. Keep going. Other way.
Oh.
Yeah. There we go. Peace and love. Yeah. That's awesome. We've never done it like that before. That's such a cool moment. Awesome. Well, Jason, you're the man. Thank you so much. Have an incredible weekend, and I'll talk to you real soon.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.